Thank you for coming. My name is Ying Chen, Director of JMSC, and very happy to host the talk today, Journalism 2.0, the future of news. We're also very happy to have Rebecca with us. If she looks familiar to you, it's not because she's been staying in Hong Kong for a long time, but because she was the bureau chief in Beijing for CNN for 9 years.
Actually, only bureau chief for 3, just to.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Bureau chief for 3. You worked there for 9 years.
For 9 years.
9 years, right? Yeah. And after that, he spent time as bureau chief for CNN in Tokyo, and then after that, for the last 2 years, she's been doing research at Harvard University on internet and legal issues and participatory journalism, and she will tell you more about that. And the JMSC is also very proud because somehow we got to convince her or kidnap her to join us. So she'll be joining us in January as a full-time assistant professor in new media come January. And she's stopping here only for 2 days, and so we're making her work since it's the JMSC tradition, and no one can come through without contributing to the profession and the industry. So I'm sure she'll talk more about her work. So I won't take more time. So Rebecca.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm going to start out with a little video, actually, which I like to show sometimes, which was made about 2 years ago initially and then updated last year by a couple of young guys who are sort of media futurists, and they're looking at what's happened so far in media changes and then projecting to what the future might be.
It is the best of times. It is the worst of times. In the year 2014, people have access to a breadth and depth of information unimaginable in an earlier age. Everyone contributes in some way. Everyone participates to create a living, breathing mediascape. However, the press, as you know it, has ceased to exist. The Fourth Estate's fortunes have waned. 20th century news organizations are an afterthought, a lonely remnant of a not too distant past. The road to 2014 began in the mid-20th century. In 1989, Tim Berners-Lee, a computer scientist at the CERN Particle Physics Laboratory in Switzerland, invents the World Wide Web. 1994 sees the founding of Amazon.com. Its young creator dreams of a store that sells everything. Amazon's model, which would come to set the standard for internet sales, is built on automated, personalized recommendations, a store that can make suggestions. In 1998, 2 Stanford programmers create Google. Their algorithm echoes the logic of Amazon. It treats links as recommendations, and from that foundation powers the world's most effective search engine. In 1999, TiVo transforms television by unshackling it from the constraints of time and commercials. Almost no one who tries it ever goes back. That year, a dot-com startup named Pyra Labs unveils Blogger, a personal publishing tool. Friendster launches in 2002, and hundreds of thousands of young people rush to populate it with an incredibly detailed map of their lives, their interests, and their social networks. Also in 2002, Google launches Google News, a news portal. News organizations cry foul. Google News is edited entirely by computers. In 2003, Google buys Blogger. Google's plans are a mystery, but their interest in Blogger is not unreasonable. 2003 is the year of the blog. 2004 would be remembered as the year that everything began. Reason Magazine sends subscribers an issue with a satellite photo of their houses on the cover and information custom-tailored to each subscriber inside. Sony and Philips unveil the world's first mass-produced electronic paper. Google unveils Gmail with a gigabyte free space for every user. Microsoft unveils NewsBot, a social news filter. Amazon unveils A9, a search engine built on Google's technology that also incorporates Amazon's trademark recommendations. And then, Google goes public. Awash in new capital, the company makes a major acquisition. Google buys TiVo. 2005. In response to Google's recent moves, Microsoft buys Friendster. 2006. Google combines all of its services, TiVo, Blogger, Gmail, Google News, and all of its searches into the Google Grid, a universal platform that provides a functionally limitless amount of storage space and bandwidth to store and share media of all kinds, always online, accessible from anywhere. Each user selects her own level of privacy. She can store her content securely on the Google Grid or publish it for all to see. It has never been easier for anyone, everyone, to create as well as consume media. 2007. Microsoft responds to Google's mounting challenge with NewsBotster, a social news network and participatory journalism platform. NewsBotster ranks and sorts news based on what each user's friends and colleagues are reading and viewing, and it allows everyone to comment on what they see. Sony's e-paper is cheaper than real paper this year. It's the medium of choice for NewsBotster. 2008 sees the alliance that will challenge Microsoft's ambitions. Google and Amazon join forces to form Googlezon. Google supplies the Google Grid, an unparalleled search technology. Amazon supplies a social recommendation engine and its huge commercial infrastructure. Together, they use their detailed knowledge of every user's social network, demographics, consumption habits, and interests to provide total customization of content and advertising. The news wars of 2010 are notable for the fact that no actual news organizations take part. Googlezon finally checkmates Microsoft with a feature the software giant cannot match. Using a new algorithm, Googlezon's computers construct news stories dynamically, stripping sentences and facts from all content sources and recombining them. The computer writes a news story for every user. In 2011, the slumbering Fourth Estate awakes to make its first and final stand. The New York Times Company sues Googlezon, claiming that the company's fact-stripping robots are a violation of copyright law. The case goes all the way to the Supreme Court, which, on August 4th, 2011, decides in favor of Googlezon. On Sunday, March 9th, 2014, Googlezon unleashes Epic. Welcome to our world. The evolving, personalized information construct is the system by which our sprawling, chaotic mediascape is filtered, ordered, and delivered. Everyone contributes now, from blog entries to phone cam images to video reports to full investigations. Many people get paid, too, a tiny cut of Google's immense advertising revenue proportional to the popularity of their contributions. Epic produces a custom content package for each user using his choices, his consumption habits, his interests, his demographics, his social network to shape the product. A new generation of freelance editors has sprung up, people who sell their ability to connect, filter, and prioritize the contents of Epic. We all subscribe to many editors. Epic allows us to mix and match their choices however we like. At its best, edited for the savviest readers, Epic is a summary of the world deeper, broader, and more nuanced than anything ever available before. But at its worst, and for too many, Epic is merely a collection of trivia, much of it untrue, all of it narrow, shallow, and sensational. But Epic is what we wanted, It is what we chose, and its commercial success preempted any discussions of media and democracy or journalistic ethics. Today, in 2014, the New York Times has gone offline. In feeble protest to Google's hegemony, the Times has become a print-only newsletter for the elite and the elderly.
That is one media scholar's interpretation of what the future of news might look like. And I'm not sure how well you could hear because the system here wasn't able to hook the sound up to the speakers. But there were a couple of things to note in that prediction. Now, it's just a prediction. It doesn't mean that's what the future of news will definitely look like. But one was, in the video, they said, is it not working? Oh, okay. In the video, they mentioned that there was the news war of 2010, or whatever it was. And they said it was notable for the fact that no actual news companies took part. That basically all the innovation was happening and being done by technology and internet companies and not by news companies. So that's a very interesting prediction that they have going forward, that these futurists are looking at how information technology is evolving, and they're not seeing news companies playing a role in the evolution of this information technology. The other interesting trend that they showed at the end was that there was this, they said a refugee from the New York Times, somebody who quit her job, went and created a new citizens media podcast service, basically, and that this became very popular. And so that's another prediction that these scholars were making, that individuals, in order to innovate, the scholar is kind of warning, really. This video is very scary to many news executives because it says not only will innovation not happen in news companies, but innovation, in order for journalists to innovate, they have to leave news companies. That's basically the two messages that are coming from this video. And that's very scary to a lot of people who run large news organizations like the New York Times and South China Morning Post and many other newspapers around the world. So what is happening? Because I don't think that the future is necessarily set in one direction. I don't think that it's necessarily the case that news companies are completely out of the game, that professional journalists have no role in the future. I actually think it's very important that journalism should survive and that professional journalism should survive. But the question is, are news companies and professional journalists doing enough to ensure that the profession of journalism survives? And if they do stand back passively, will they be overtaken by Google and Amazon and so on and left on the sidelines? And so there's a bit of a struggle going on. I want to talk a little bit about really kind of technically what's going on and what the web, the internet, is doing to change the way in which people relate to information, and how the mechanics of the challenges to news organizations and to journalism are working. And so until we had the internet and until we had fairly easy to use software tools, news was read only. You receive a newspaper, you read it, That's that. Or you watch a broadcast, you receive the information. That's also, in a way, read-only. Or you listen to a radio report and you just receive it as the word from on high and finished, end of story. The web is a read-write environment. That means that media, the nature of media changes from something that a member of the public just receives, finished, end of story, to a multi-directional process where anybody can also write on the web or upload information. And write, really, in the computer science sense, doesn't just mean words, but also pictures, sound, and so on, that anybody can write to the web. We also, because of the nature of the read-write web, Dan Gilmore, who's a visiting professor here at Hong Kong University very often, and I think maybe some of you have heard him speak, he recently wrote a book called We the Media, and it's about grassroots journalism and citizens media that has been enabled by the internet. And the fact of the matter is that, to use a Marxist terminology, the means of production for creating media has gone way down. It used to be that if you wanted to create media, you had to have access to a lot of capital. You had to have enough money to start a TV station or a newspaper, or at least have enough money to Xerox newsletters and get them out to everybody. Now all you need is an internet connection. And in some cases, you don't even need to know how to write. If you know how to speak and take pictures, you can create media. And that is a revolutionary thing. And it's a little bit scary for some news organizations who are quite used to, they give you the word on high and you receive it, and you should be very grateful for their wisdom. And increasingly, members of the public are creating their own media and becoming popular, and is sometimes not always quite as grateful for the wisdom. And so basically journalism 1.0, which is journalism basically up until a few years ago, was a lecture. And journalism 2.0, which is the journalism of the future, which I think is possible, and can involve news companies and can involve professional journalists as well as members of the public. That is the journalism of a conversation, of public discourse. And so just to give you a little more of an idea of what this means, just because you have a web page does not mean you are having a conversation. That in the 1990s, all the news organizations put up websites, and they had links to their stories. But it was still 1.0. Why was it 1.0? Because it's still a lecture. They put their information on the web for you to receive, finished. That there was really nothing else that you, as a member of the public, could do with it, except for maybe link to it if you have a blog, but you had no other way of interacting, you had no other way of contributing to the process that they were doing. Now with Web 2.0, I want to talk a little bit, I'm going to use my own personal weblog as an example of the difference between 1.0 and 2.0, and I'm using my blog because it's easy for me to get into the inside, but the same principles can apply to a news site or any other site, but this is just simple. So this is my blog here. It's at ourconversation.com. And the other day I posted my own report on the web about a blogger conference I attended in China. And so I posted the pictures and the text report, but I also did, because of the nature of my site, see, here's basically how I'm able to write very easily on the inside. This is the interface where basically you don't need to know any computer programming language, you don't need to know any HTML coding to write a blog. I just write it there on the interface. And then also people can post comments on my blog. So anybody can go here, and I'll show you the real one, because I think I'm online. So here's the real one. And so here's the blog post here that I wrote. And anybody can go in, and not only can they read what I wrote, but they can write back. And so I had written basically an analysis of what I thought was happening at this conference of bloggers in China. And I reported about a discussion that was taking place about whether censorship is hurting innovation in China. And there were some people in the bloggers conference who had suggested that censorship is making it harder for Chinese businesses to create new products. And so a bunch of people came and posted comments. So this is one person here who wrote his reaction to whether he thinks that's true. And then several more people actually began to engage in a debate at the bottom of my report about whether they think that's true. And actually there were a couple guys who actually know quite a lot about the venture capital market in China. And they started to contribute actually some very detailed insight about how venture capitalists make decisions about innovation and what to invest in China, and whether censorship hurts those decisions or not, or whether it limits the chance of a Chinese company to succeed or not. And so as a result, because I allowed the public to come in and have this discussion, it added extra information. And it enabled people not only to read what I said, but I wasn't saying, okay, I know everything about this subject. I said, here's what I saw, here's my observation, what do you guys think? And then people came and they added their own knowledge to the discussion. And so when the reader comes and looks at it, they can get an even fuller picture about what they think. And they can also, if they want, they can, if they have their own blog, they might link to my blog on their blog, and then the conversation spans out across the web. So here's a guy who has a site about law in China, and he added more discussion about what I wrote on his site. And so then what happens is that information is not only a read-write conversation on one site, but it's spanning across the web in a web of links. And that's exactly why the World Wide Web is called the World Wide Web. That's why Tim Berners-Lee, when he invented the web, called it the web, because it's all about these links going back and forth between websites. So here's an example. This is a little faster to do it this way. In that one post I wrote, I linked to actually about a dozen different websites in the course of writing that one blog post. And this is just a selection, just in the first couple of paragraphs, some of the sites that I recommended to my readers. And so not only am I talking about what I saw, but I'm showing, okay, and here's some other people who are talking about the same thing, and here's where you can go for more information. So another key aspect of this, of information on the web, is sharing information and acknowledging really that you are not the only expert on any given subject, that there are lots of other experts out there who can add more information. And that one reason why many blogs have become very popular is because readers find a value in this web of links. And there are many tools now. This is one tool called Technorati, which enables you to plug in the web address of any website and see who is linking to it. So this was the other day, I did a check to see what people are linking to my site. But you can do the same thing for New York Times or for any site that is freely available on the web to see who is linking to your site and what they are saying about what you're writing. So again, it's this web of discourse happening across the internet with information flowing almost virally that way. The other thing about the Web 2.0 is content has been freed of its container. And what this is right now, this is one simple newsreader program that Yahoo provides. It's called My Yahoo, and what I can do is, you see up there our conversation, those are the headlines from my own blog. So if I want, I can read my blog's headlines not from my own site, but I can use a program like this that will pull the content from any site that is programmed and set up to talk to these programs. I can pull the content into a newsreader program. I'll show you one other more complicated example of a newsreader program that I use personally, which I installed on my own computer. So this is my blog in what's called an RSS feed. And so this program has sucked the content out of my blog, and I can read it here online. Here's another site. This is Global Voices Online, which is a big site that I run. Here is what it looks like on the website. Lots and lots of content. But actually, a lot of the time, I don't read this website on the site. I read it through my newsreader, because this way I can pull in the content from many different websites, and I can quickly go through. This is East, South, West, North, Roland Sung. Many of you probably read his blog. Again, I'm pulling in the headlines of his blog onto this program. China Digital News, that's another popular site following China. And so I can see, rather than go to each web page, I can see what they're writing through my own program. It saves me a lot of time, because this is the problem with so much information out there on the web. How do you process all of it? This is how I read the New York Times. I pull in what's called their RSS feed, and I can get the New York Times headlines right here. Now, if I want to, if I see the articles that I want to read, then I can click on the headline and read the original web page and get the full article. But maybe, I'm in a hurry and I just want to see the headlines. It's much faster for me to go through. So in this way, the content has really, between citizens media, any blog, and a professional media source, it's equal in this program that I'm reading, and I can decide who I want to read. So just to give you a bit more sense, this is the feed that is coming out of my blog through what's called an RSS feed. It's the software for my site is coded in such a way automatically that it will send my content out if you subscribe to it. And just by clicking on that little XML button, and it also enables people to use different programs to subscribe to my content. Now, actually, most major news organizations now are very clued into this, because more and more people are reading news sites not by going to the website, but by subscribing to the feed. And so this is New York Times. If you scroll down to the bottom of the New York Times webpage, on their front page, there's a little link that says RSS, and then it'll take you here. And this will enable you to subscribe either to all of the New York Times content or certain categories of New York Times content. So increasingly, news organizations are responding to the fact that readers out there maybe don't have time to go to their web page, but might want to get the content other ways. And so there are newsreader programs that also would enable me to read New York Times headlines and blog headlines and any other headlines available in RSS on my phone, so that I could do it that way as well. And you can also subscribe to these feeds on other devices increasingly. So that's one thing that's going on technically. Now we have this phenomenon that's emerging called citizen journalism. and there are individual bloggers, and I'll talk a bit more about those in a moment. You also have online organizations that are using the web to very easily collect the energies of concerned citizens to report on issues that they care about. And so Oh My News was one of the earliest citizen journalism sites, which became very, very famous because it rose up in the sort of early thousands, really, and helped the current president of South Korea, Roh Moo-hyun, be elected to power. And one of the reasons why Oh My News was very successful was that South Korea is a fairly recent democracy, and up until quite recently, the traditional media in South Korea was controlled by one side of the political spectrum. Basically, the right-wing conservatives tended to control the print and broadcast media. And so there were a lot of people on the left who felt that there was no media organization that really spoke to their interests. And a guy named Oh Young-ho set up Oh My News, and he called on people out there in society to help create this online newspaper. And people rose to the occasion, and the newspaper became, this online newspaper became very, very successful. And mainly they have some editors who collect the content and edit it, but basically they welcome anybody in South Korea who writes in Korean to contribute articles, and they're paid, like $10 or something US, nothing that's really going to earn them a living, but they want to do it because they want to have an impact on their society, and they feel that something needs to be said that their mainstream media is not saying. And so that's why Oh My News has been successful, is that there's a segment of the population who feel that they're filling a hole that the mainstream media in South Korea was not filling. Oh My News has an international site in English, which actually isn't so successful. They're having trouble getting traffic. And part of the reason is that I've been observing that a lot of online citizen media, if it doesn't have a clear focus about what hole, what gap it's trying to fill, what need it's trying to fill, it's much harder to do general news. And so they're finding some contributors from all over the world to provide articles, but they're having a little trouble getting a big audience or a loyal following or a loyal set of long-term contributors because they haven't yet figured out who they represent. Other citizen media projects, one project that's very new in the United States that's been very successful is run by something called the Sunlight Foundation, where basically they set up a database, and they said, okay, we have 437 members of Congress, and we want to know how many members of Congress have put their wife or their husband on the payroll for their campaign. And so they invited all the citizens throughout the United States to help them dig up this information through publicly available databases and so on. And they went through and they found that as of October 8th, they found that 19 spouses were paid by a member's campaign. And so this, again, when you have sort of a focused purpose for people out there to do research on an issue they care about, that they want to dig up public information, citizen media organizations are finding that they're able to mobilize members of the public to dig up information that, news organizations don't have so many employees. So they're limited in how much research they can do into 437 members of Congress. But if they invite the public to help them do that, the internet makes it very easy to get the public to collaborate. Now, one other project that hasn't been so successful is Wiki News. Now, all of you know about Wikipedia, which is very successful, the online encyclopedia. They created a project called Wiki News a couple years ago, where they were inviting people to use the same idea to have a news site that anybody can edit, and let's see what happens. And they actually found that the citizen journalists, if they're just trying to create a general news site and compete with Reuters and AP just on covering all breaking news everywhere, they don't compete very well with the professionals, actually. And Wiki News has not been that popular. And here and there have been a couple stories that they have broken, but Wiki News has found that actually they haven't been so successful in competing with professionals who are basically, it's their job to be inconvenienced at 2 a.m. when a story breaks, to go run to the airport and cover it, or to go to the earthquake site and so on. And that there's a lot of breaking news stories that it's hard to be able to count on citizens, just non-professionals, randomly to go cover everything. And so that this is one place where people are finding that, again, there are lessons about in what situations it's very effective to harness the power of ordinary citizens to really target an issue, and in what situations are professionals more effective. And this is just an inside of Wiki News, and it shows how anybody can just go in, just like on Wikipedia, and create a news article. And maybe it will be that in some places it might take off, but so far they haven't had a huge impact in breaking big stories. And this also shows every time somebody goes and edits a story, you can go in and look at it. And I'll skip through the Wikipedia slide. I think most of you guys know about Wikipedia, but again, it's the same idea that with Wikipedia, that's been very effective, because they're not trying to do breaking news, but what they are trying to do is collect sort of a huge compendium of knowledge that's static. And they've found actually that amateurs working on that is much more effective, because people can do it in their spare time, after their kids go to bed, or on the weekend. And you don't have to, if you're going to do an encyclopedia article about AIDS, or if you're going to do an encyclopedia even about the Islamic Courts Union, or about Guantanamo suicide attempts, because it's a static thing, you can wait until you have time, and you don't have to be, the speed is not so necessary. And we're finding that when actually speed and instantaneous action on particularly more general stories, again, the amateurs have not been beating the professionals for the most part. Although what's very interesting, and what perhaps the professionals might be able to learn from Wikipedia, and one reason why Wikipedia is so popular and as credible as it is that you can go in and see the discussion. So this is on the inside. There was an entry about Guantanamo suicide attempts, and then the contributors went in and discussed whether the information was credible and accurate. And there was some disagreement about some of the information. And anybody who's reading Wikipedia can go in and look at the debates that happened around the information, and then can decide to contribute themselves. And it has been suggested that news organizations, if they opened up that process about why they decided to do a certain story, why did you decide to quote this guy and not that guy, that maybe that would help the public understand and trust your news a little better. Now, there's one thing that news organizations, again, as I mentioned with citizens media, citizens media can often help fill in the gaps, because news organizations just can't have journalists everywhere all the time. And one of the problems we're seeing, particularly with, shall we say, the multinational English language media, is that they are prioritizing what parts of the world are more important than what other parts of the world. In other words, the news of which human beings is more important than which other human beings. I mean, that's effectively the decision that's getting made every day by editors in New York and Atlanta and London, and that news then gets fed out to the rest of the world, and as a result, the local papers all around the world who don't have the resources to have big groups of foreign correspondents are really depending on the editorial choices of a handful of Western-based news agencies. And as we're seeing, this is a map that was made by a colleague of mine who's been tracking global media attention when using Google News, which brings in a lot of news, English language news sources. There are certain countries that get a lot more attention than others. And as you'll see, the dark red indicates the most number of stories, and the pink is sort of in the middle, and the blue is less and less. And so that's what the world looks like. And so if you look at this map of media attention, you'll see that the mainstream professional media has decided that Africans don't really matter very much. And Mongolians don't matter very much. And they're a lot less important than Chinese. That's, there have been some value judgments that are made about the news, and it's more important that you hear about the news from certain countries than from others. And so this is, and here again, there's been some correlations made with GDP. The number of stories from Japan that you find from CNN.com with 127 million people, a comparable country, basically in Africa, 130 million people, you get a lot fewer stories. And so this is the sort of correlation that people are finding. Now, if you happen to be Japanese, that's really great. The international media finds you really important. But if you're Nigerian, that's telling you that you are a less important human being, according to the international media, than a Japanese person. And how does that make you feel? And so we have increasingly people, because of the internet, creating their own media and talking to the world. And it's not only in countries where people feel like they're being ignored, but also in countries where people feel that the mainstream international media maybe can't get the full perspective. So before the U.S. invaded Iraq, there were some foreign journalists in Iraq, and they were doing a lot of stories about Iraq. But the problem was that particularly under Saddam Hussein, it was almost impossible for a foreign journalist to interview an Iraqi person and for that Iraqi person to actually dare to say anything true about what they really thought, because it was just too dangerous for them to speak truthfully to a foreign reporter, if they spoke to them at all. But there was this Iraqi guy who used the fake name Salam Pax, who started a blog in the run-up before the U.S. went into Iraq, and began to give his perspective. And he was anonymous. It was the only way he could do this without getting hauled off to jail at that time. But he was telling his stories from what it's like living in a Baghdad neighborhood with his family, and how the impending invasion and how all these global debates about whether the U.S. should invade Iraq or not, how that all looked from the perspective of an educated Iraqi, and how conflicted he felt, because on one hand he hated Saddam, and on the other hand he really didn't want to get bombed, and so he was talking about his feeling of confliction there. And this was a voice you couldn't get from the TV stories, because no Iraqi would say these things to CNN, because it was too dangerous. But you could get this perspective on his blog, which he was publishing anonymously from Baghdad. Now, of course, there were some questions about, is this guy really who he says he is? Eventually, it was verified who he was, and he's now become quite famous and has written a book and so on, and is working for some news organizations. But again, he just took matters into his own hands with the web. And there are increasingly people around the world, particularly in the Middle East and Africa, but also in Asia and Eastern Europe and even Central Asia, people who feel that the international media is either ignoring them or portraying them in a way that they feel does not reflect who they feel they are. And so this guy named Mahmoud in Bahrain has a very popular blog in the Middle East where he talks about politics in Bahrain, but also talks about the Arab perspective on a lot of things. And he's a moderate Arab. He runs a campaign basically for secularism, and we shouldn't be Sunni or Shiite. We should just be Bahraini and so on. But he actually said very clearly in his about statement in his blog that one of the reasons why he set up this site is he felt that the international media only listens to the extreme voices in the Arab world because those are the loudest voices. And that the silent majority of people in the Arab world who are minding their own business and not on the street yelling don't get heard so much by the international media. And so he and quite a lot of moderate Arabs in the Muslim world have been starting weblogs to try and get what they feel is their voice out that they feel is not heard so well. There is a huge African blogosphere, and there's a movement of blogging by Africans, not only in Africa, but also kind of in the African diaspora, people from various African countries living around the world, to try and bring more attention to their countries by blogging. They feel that the international media, when it covers Africa, only covers certain stories, and that there's much more to Africa than those stories. And so they are, every day, there are tens of thousands of African bloggers writing about what is happening in their countries. You have blogs in all kinds of languages now. This is a Persian blog. There's several 100,000 Persian bloggers. And again, these are people then speaking to the Persian language community, both inside Iran and outside of Iran, and creating connections that hadn't been possible before. And in China, of course, as many of you know, and some of us spoke in Professor Ying Chan's class last night, there's somewhere between 15 and 30 million blogs in China, and a lot of particularly young Chinese are seeing blogs as a way to talk about issues they find interesting, which aren't covered in their mainstream media. And we have people like Roland Song, who is a blogger here in Hong Kong, who are taking that content that's in Chinese on the internet and translating excerpts into English. And we call this bridge blogging. That this is an activity by also a growing number of people around the world, many of whom are not trying to profit, but who feel, Roland feels that the West doesn't understand China properly. And he thinks that more information from the Chinese language internet needs to be brought into English so that the West can understand China better. And so he's doing this really as a public service. And so increasingly people are doing this. And again, all of these blogs everywhere, they are connected increasingly by that web of links that I was talking about earlier. And so people are linking to one another. They're creating these conversations across the web because the technology enables that to do it. It's not just a site that is out there, but these are sites where people are linking to other sites. They're having conversations with one another. They're engaging in discourse about issues. So we have this picture in media now. I mean, most people at this point are going, oh my God, I have a headache. Who has 36 hours every day to read all this stuff? It's crazy. How do I keep on top of this stuff? I'd really like to know more about Africa and Nigerians, but who has time? And so this is the shift, again, we have in media, is that in the past, you had high cost of media production, so you had few media outlets, And the main issue that editors were facing was that there was a scarcity of airtime, a scarcity of space in the newspaper, a scarcity of space in the magazine. And so it's a matter of figuring out what are the priorities and squeezing your priorities into that space that you have in your media outlet. But now it's kind of the opposite problem. You have low cost of production. Everybody and their dog can create media. And so the real commodity here, the real scarcity is no longer space, it's attention. And so how do you get anybody to pay attention to what's important? And how do you get the public to pay attention to issues that are important for the public and issues that are important for people's lives, and not just, paying attention to movie stars and trading pictures of their cats or something, which maybe they have plenty of time to do that all day. So what do? And so increasingly they're part of Web 2.0 are all these companies that are developing, most of them small internet startups, that are innovating to try and figure out how to help people find what they want and how to deal with this scarcity of time and scarcity of attention. And this is just one startup that ended up getting bought by Yahoo, but it was just this guy working in his garage at one point, which enables you to bookmark websites that you like. So basically, I have an account on this site, and any time that I find an article or a blog post or anything on the web that I want to save, I could save it in my browser, but that's a pain, and I can't share it, and then it's too much, and so on. But I can save it on the web by using this bookmarking system. And I can give it, if you see underneath it, each item that I read, and you can see there's some blog posts and some articles and so on, I give it a tag. I give it a subject tag, and you can see some of the tags I have down the side. And this one up there, news, journalism, media, blogs, blogging, internet. So I give it a subject tag so that I can go back and find things according to the subject later. But what this also does, this is public. So it's sharing with everybody else. So I can tag things with journalism, and that means that anybody else looking for articles that have been tagged with journalism can find the stuff that I thought was interesting. So this is the Delicious page for the journalism tag. So Delicious is the name of this service, and this is basically the page that shows all the articles that were tagged frequently by all the people who have accounts and tagged it with journalism that they thought were interesting. And so then I can take this, and you saw that feed reader that I have that I showed you earlier. I can actually subscribe to a headline feed from this. So I can subscribe to an update every time somebody out there using this system tags an article with journalism. I can get it in my inbox. And then I can decide if I want to read it or not. But this is just one of many systems that people are using to share information. Now, I'm co-founder of a site called Global Voices Online, which is trying to solve some of these problems, or a number of these problems. And as you'll see at the top, we have a tag cloud, which is trying to help us aggregate information about different countries. And we deliberately, because you saw that map earlier that shows the U.S. and Europe and Western Europe in red, and a lot of the rest of the world not in red, we ignore North America and Western Europe. We don't bother with them at all because we figure other people can work on that. And so our site is tracking the content and conversation coming from blogs and some other citizen media sites outside of North America and Western Europe. And so basically how it works is we have editors who every day are basically linking to what they feel are the 5 to 10 most interesting blogs coming out of any particular region. So you see Middle East and North Africa. And then we have more volunteers who are saying, okay, here's what the Pakistan blogs are talking about this week. Here's what the Polish blogs are talking about this week. Because we know that most people are not going to have time to go searching in Google to find out, if something happens in Lebanon, what are the Lebanese bloggers talking about? That you need to have services that are going to help people find what they need. And so our site, basically, by trying to provide context, this is a post that is linking to lots of different Iranian sites that are talking about that cartoon controversy where there was a Danish cartoon making fun of Islam and there were riots. There was a lot of discussion about that in the Islamic world and arguments about it. And we had a guy who then went and linked to this stuff and gave explanation and context. We also have people doing translation from blogs in different languages, and this is translation from Arabic. And this is just a look at our team. Basically, we have no full-time staff at the moment. We have people, including Oiwan Lam sitting right there, who's helping us with Northeast Asia, who work on a part-time basis to help us aggregate the most interesting content coming out of their regions, and then managing a set of volunteers, and then we also have people translating content. And again, what this is seeking to do, we're not trying to replace Reuters News Agency. What we're trying to do is complement what professionals are doing, because we recognize, having looked at what's going on with citizens media, what experiments work, what experiments don't work, as I was showing earlier, that it's unrealistic to say, okay, forget about the professional journalists, we're just going to get, dentists and students to go and cover the world for us. Actually, that's probably not the best idea, but how do we create a new media environment where you have really the best of the professional journalism and the best of citizen media working together to help the public understand the world better and to help everybody get the information that they need and then also react to it and respond to it. And so one partnership we have is with Reuters, where they will have a special news page with their news coverage on an event, and then at the bottom they will run some content from our network of bloggers on what are the bloggers saying about this news event. So it's not that we're saying you can only read the bloggers if you want to know the truth. We're saying here's what the professionals are reporting, here's what the bloggers are reporting. You can look at both. You can go and get the accounts from the ground from the bloggers and have a discussion with them on their blog. And the feeling is that if you bring these things together in a complementary way, that will help the public understand things better. There's a number of other experiments, and I'll just go through a couple of them quickly because I know we're running low on time. The AP has created an experimental project called Newsvine, where they allow people to set up blogs on this site and then discuss AP stories and then link to other stories. And this is a way where they're again trying to create what one might call a community of conversation around news content, to try and get people who blog and who want to discuss the news and who have unique things to contribute to also find the professional work valuable to them as they're trying to discuss the issues they care about, and to have that give and take. And it's really an effort to build loyalty to that news content, because we have this problem, of course, that a lot of news organizations feel that they're losing readers. And so this is one blogger who's commented himself on some articles and is also linking to AP content. Washington Post is doing a lot to go in a Web 2.0 direction. This is the example of one article recently talking about the Democrats in the U.S. and how their chances for winning the Senate are increasing. As you'll see, they're linking to things, and they also, there on the side, they have this thing that says who's blogging. And what they've done is they've got a partnership with that service called Technorati that I showed you earlier that will take you to a page, and this shows you all the bloggers who are linking to that article and what they are saying in reaction. And in some cases, they might be adding new information or adding new perspectives or arguing about the information in the article. Or maybe one blogger found some wrong information in that article. And Washington Post is linking to that stuff because they think that this will help build value and trust, that they're not afraid of possibly having somebody disagreeing with their article, that actually the more they do this, the more likely it is that people will read Washington Post content and not somebody else's content. And actually they are finding that bloggers now, because they might appear on the Washington Post, are more likely to link to a Washington Post article about a story than a New York Times article about a story, because their blog will have a link from the Washington Post, and then they feel that will bring more attention to them. And then people will go on the blog and post comments and make suggestions and maybe argue about it and give suggestions for guests. And then they'll air the show. The audio is also available. It's on the radio, but you can also listen to it on the website. And then people can continue discussing the show on the blog after that show has aired. And the producers for this show tell me that sometimes there will be arguments about the issues on a show that aired 3 Tuesdays ago, and it will still continue a discussion. And again, that this helps to build loyalty, because the listener or the reader is feeling it's not just they're receiving a lecture and that's finished, but they're actually having a possibility to contribute to the story. There's some other, the Greensboro in North Carolina, there's a local newspaper that has developed a very close relationship with bloggers in their area, and they actually invite bloggers to help them cover things that they don't have reporters to cover. This is the blog aggregator in Greensboro. This is Bakersfield, California. They have a citizens media site where they invite members of the public to contribute content, and it's a complement to their, I'm sorry, I'm going too fast. It's a complement, again, to their professional journalism, and they're basically trying to invite the public to offer information, offer content, offer news, and then the reporters can not only get story ideas, but it will also make the public feel that this news organization is really serving them. It's not just trying to manipulate them or to sell advertising to them, but it's really meant to serve their needs, and again, building the trust. There's also just one final project that just got started. There's a new organization called newassignment.net that just got some funding, where they're going to try and create new ways to bring professional journalists and bloggers together to investigate specific stories and try and find new ways to dig up information on some stories that, for whatever reason, didn't get enough coverage in the traditional ways in the traditional media. And finally, of course, this is not just an English language phenomenon, that blogging is happening all over the world. There was a blogger conference in China that I just attended. China has 15 to 30 million blogs, depending on how you count. And this is, of course, a big challenge to the official way that the official media functions in China, because you have people creating media on their own and saying what they want. Now, of course, this is censored to a certain degree, and one could give a whole nother talk about how the censorship happens and what kinds of things people can do to get around censorship and how successful it is or not. But the bloggers are continuing to have an impact, particularly on Chinese culture and getting information out in new ways. And we're increasingly finding that while, of course, the Chinese government is very suspicious of blogging and has actually announced that they're discussing new regulations that would control blogging much more tightly and require people to use their new names, we're finding that a lot of Chinese journalists are getting story ideas from blogs, and they're using blogs as a way to get stories out that they weren't allowed to publish in their own newspaper. And so the internet, we can expect, will continue to impact the way Chinese media evolves, even though the government does try and get certain stories blocked from being seen, both from the outside, and they also require that the Chinese companies delete information about protests and so on that take place on the web. And just final slide, the future is really going to be interesting because China is quickly going to have the #1 largest group of internet users in the world. China right now has about 10% of its population online, and that's already #2 in the world internet users. What's going to happen when China becomes the primary body of internet users in the world? And we have a situation now where media and the future of media is not being driven by professionals. Increasingly, it's being driven by how members of the public are using media, how they're using blogs, what choices they're making, why somebody in Africa decides to blog, or why somebody in China is deciding to use mobile phones to do content. And increasingly, you're seeing innovation in media happen just because some individual wants to find some way to communicate and had troubles communicating in the old way, so they figure out how to use technology in a new way to communicate what they want to communicate. So despite the fact that there's censorship in China, despite the fact that there are many challenges, I think we can expect to see quite a lot of innovation coming out of China in media in the future, because as Chinese internet users face challenges, particularly in communication, that's when you see a lot of problem solving and people using technology in creative ways. So it's going to be very, very interesting. It's going to be interesting to see to what extent we can avoid that future that was in that video, where the news companies become irrelevant. And to what extent can news companies find new ways to work with citizens and really create the best of both worlds? And to what extent will Western news companies, be tuned in to what's happening on the Chinese internet and the innovations that are happening on the Chinese internet? And to what extent will there be sharing of that innovation? So with that, I think I better allow for some questions.